exploring our oneness with Spirit and each other. Unity Online Radio.
Live from Sacramento, California, it's Design Your Life with Kevin Ross and friends. Get ready to raise the roof in your life and break through to a life without limits with the coach's coach, Kevin Ross.
The truth of the old African proverb that we are people through other people is tonight very evocatively being demonstrated by this gathering of so many people from all parts of the world. This coming together here in the southernmost city on the African continent of representatives from such a wide range of the faiths of the world symbolizes the acknowledgement of our mutual interdependence and common humanity. It is to me a humbling experience to be part of this moving expression and reaffirmation of the nobility of the human spirit. This century has seen enough of destruction, injustice, strife, and division, suffering and pain, and of our capacity to be massively inhuman, the one to the other. There is sufficient cause for being cynical about human life and about humanity. This gathering at the close of our century serves to counter despairing cynicism and calls us to a recognition and reaffirmation of that which is great and generous and caring in the human spirit.
Welcome to a special edition of Design Your Life. I'm your host, Kevin Ross. Today on Design Your Life, we have a special tribute to one of the greatest leaders the world has ever seen, former South African President Nelson Mandela. And I want to share with you some of my personal reflections on President Mandela's, the impact that he's had on my life. And we'll begin with an excerpt of a recent interview I had the pleasure to be a part of in remembrance of Madiba, Nelson Mandela. This is from Insight with Beth Ruriak on Capital Public Radio.
Would you share with me how you're experiencing this passing?
It is as though globally the sun has set and perhaps there's no sense of it rising again.
You met in 1999.
Yes.
Would you share the story?
I was fresh out of college, Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. I went there in order to follow in the footsteps of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who was also one of my great inspirations. And graduating college, I learned about a conference, the Parliament of the World's Religions. It's a conference where over 101 religious traditions gather to find ways to work across faith lines in order to solve our common hurts. And so, and Mandela, President Mandela was going to be keynoting at this, and a penniless college graduate, I said, I'm going. Wow. Made this declaration. A chain of events occurred that not only allowed me to go, but allowed me to be a bona fide youth delegate. I made this declaration as I was flying to South Africa with one of my mentees who also graduated Morehouse recently. I said that of all the people coming in and out of South Africa, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to shake the hand of President Mandela. I knew I would see him in the audience of over 6,000 people, but I was determined to hold hands with history. And as I entered this grand stadium where the president was going to be addressing us, I walked into a colleague of mine and mentor, really, Dr. Bernard Beckwith of the Association of Global New Thought, who I hadn't seen in years. And he says, "Kevin, what are you doing here?" "Well, I'm a delegate of the parliament." "Tell me, what are you doing here?" He says, "I'm about to present an award to President Mandela." I said, "I totally want to join you in that." And he said, "It's done." But he said it's done in such a way that that a boy, way to go. He wasn't guaranteeing it. But to make a long story short, I happened to have the right credentials. And as we walked in, I ended up backstage and standing there. His president's advance team came while we were all gathered backstage. I'm backstage with people like Gandhi's granddaughter, and some luminaries from around the world. And his advance team came in and said, "Please don't use any flash photography for the president because it hurts his eyes." And his eyes would be a theme for me that evening. So we stood still with bated breath, and in walks the sunshine. He walked in his charismatic way. He shook every hand in the honor corps. And then he finally got to me, and time stood still. And I had an opportunity to be with him long enough to really look into his eyes. And his eyes were not dimmed. There was you couldn't feel any bitterness or hatred or any of that. It was just a purity and a sunshine about him. And I knew I was holding hands with history. And I knew that just that touch in that moment, my life would never be the same again. And later I got to present with that delegation the award, the Gandhi King Award for Nonviolence, to President Mandela.
So what theme do you take with you? What will be that pebble in your pocket that you'll hold forever about the experience of Nelson Mandela in your life?
That we all can live our boldest dreams. Despite whatever odds face us, we can live our boldest dreams. We can all dig a little deeper. We can all reach a little higher. We can all be a little more patient and be a little more persistent for the things that really matter the most to us. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I always strive to be among that small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to have President Mandela be one of them in my life.
Today on Design Your Life, we pay tribute to this incredible inspiration and light in the world, President Nelson Mandela, who recently made his transition. I have many friends joining me in reflection today. I'd like to introduce first Ona Brown, a talented personal transformational coach and teacher who was actually with me on the day I shook hands with President Mandela in 1999. I'd also like to welcome one of my mentors who I mentioned a moment ago, Reverend Dr. Bernard Beckwith. He is the senior minister of the Agape International Spiritual Center and the president of the Association of Global New Thought. Welcome, Ona and Dr. Michael.
Hey, thank you, Brother Rev Kev. That was a beautiful interview, and I just relived that whole time as I was listening to your interview.
Mm-hmm. So what, Dr. Michael, what was your experience of that moment, meeting the president?
It was pretty much as you described. I can remember him walking in the room, and it was like time had stopped, like eternity had broken to time. And I do remember them sharing with us not to take any flash photography of his eyes. But as you indicated, when you looked into him, you saw this depth, you saw this guileless, radiant love, and tremendous patience. There was not a rush, there was not haste about him, there was not hurry around him that we sometimes feel when we're in the city, when we're doing what we have to do, we're called to certain accomplishments and tasks. There was no haste. He was very present. Every step was meaningful. Every handshake was meaningful. He wasn't rushing through to get through the line. A handshake, to shake everyone's hand, every handshake was meaningful. And I felt just honored that I was giving him an award for the Gandhi King Season for Nonviolence Award. It just felt very interesting that I'm giving him an award for that. And I was the one feeling extremely honored to be able to meet him, to speak with him, and to offer that particular gift.
What impact has his work had on your life and ministry? What do you take of him with you today?
Probably three things. One would be, of course, the power of forgiveness. His ability, he basically raised the bar of humanity by not having war tribunals, but by having forgiveness tribunals instead. That was very meaningful for the planet, because he raised the bar for the entire planet, for all governments, and raised the planet for us individually. Like if he could go through 27 years of that kind of abuse and oppression, being incarcerated, and come out with that kind of heart, that kind of ability, so can we. And so I would say one is forgiveness. The second would be, there was a time that when he was imprisoned in Robben Island, that he thought all was lost. And he even had that as a thought on his mind, that everything, he'd been getting the news reports of the abuse and the atrocities and the jailings, and he just thought maybe it was over, the struggle was over. And then he went on to say that a thought went across his mind. And that thought was, what if all is not lost? And he meditated on that particular thought for a long time. What if all is not lost? And then that thought transmuted into, what if me being in prison was a part of the plan to free South Africa? And then that thought led to, if that's true, what shall I do? And he said, I shall write. And he began to write about possibilities. He began to write about what was going on in prison. Many of those things were, of course, snuck out of prison and became a part of the rallying call for his freedom. So he teaches us, like, one thought can change your whole destiny. What if all is not lost? And what if my being in this situation is actually transformative to the life of South Africa? And then, of course, number three, him and his colleagues used to meet up against the wall when they were breaking rocks and actually map out what they would do if they got out in terms of what kind of government they would have. So they were speaking into the power of vision. So I would say the power of forgiveness, the power of what one thought can do if you meditate on it long enough, and three, the power of vision. The man continues to change my life, and great, great, great inspiration.
Well said, Dr. Beckwith. Dr. Beckwith is the founder of the Agape International Spiritual Center and the president of the Association of Global New Thought. Joining us is transformational coach and one of my dear friends who we recently reunited in Miami, Florida at another transition of Dr. Mary Tumpkin, who recently made her transition in Miami, Florida. Many of you know her. Ona and I reunited there. Ona, welcome to Design Your Life.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Take a moment to recount your unique experience of how it came together for you in as you would describe in a miraculous way, meeting the President Mandela and being at the Parliament of the World's Religions.
It was an entire miraculous unfolding from beginning to end for me. And the way that I actually manifested being there, I know was not by accident or by chance. And the fact that you and I were able to hold the vision, because we actually spoke into existence that we were going to be able to meet him. But there was nothing lined up for that. And when we saw the Reverend Michael Beckwith, we were like, what are you doing here? Just like you said. And it was so exciting that he was like, oh, I'm here to present an award. And we were like, are you kidding? And I remember taking the bag from his wife because they had been traveling and they were tired. And we became the instant armor bearers for them. And we helped them to get down front. And the excitement, I was so excited because I knew at that moment that we had just collided with destiny and speaking that into existence distance and holding the vision and not even knowing that we would actually cross paths with someone that we knew all the way in Cape Town, South Africa. It was just an amazing experience. And then I was on the front row sitting next to Mr. Reverend Michael Beckwith's wife, and that's when they came back and said that we would be able to join you and he backstage to be able to be among maybe 12 to 20 people to actually meet him and shake his hand. And they took us through security, and they while they were patting us down to make sure that we didn't have anything on us and that we were okay to go back.
Because you are usually packing, Ona. You are usually packing, aren't you? You are usually packing,
yes, of course, you know. You're too funny. Yeah, packing light of love. So as we get backstage, I'm standing there thinking, is this really happening? And he's addressing the Parliament of the World Religions. And I'm shaking all over, and I keep peeping my head over to see the steps that he's going to ascend down as he finally, you hear this huge standing ovation, and he begins to make his descension down the steps. I'm just remembering this moment of like, this is really happening. I'm really about to meet a powerful man who went from prisoner to president. And I knew in that moment that anything was possible. I knew in that moment that it would be life transforming for the rest of my existence. And it still is to this day. And what I get from him more than anything is the power of significant living and not just being about oneself. One of his quotes that I love is, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made to the lives of others. That will determine the significance of the life we lead. And so with that, the name of my company is World Impact Now, which is when, and all the things that I do, from my radio talk show, Own Your Dreams with Ona Brown, to traveling and speaking and coaching and training nationally and internationally, it's all about being able to continue that type of light and that type of love and legacy of making a difference and being who we are designed to be.
Well, Ona, I remember that moment vividly, and I remember us coming back, or maybe, I don't know if we came back to retrieve you and Ricky, but I remember the moment that you came back. And I forgot that he walked down a flight of steps after the presentation. And I'm grateful that you've taken, in your own life and in your own work, some of his wisdom to share around the world. We're talking with luminaries from around the United States as we reflect on the life and the legacy of late former South African President Nelson Mandela. We'll talk more about this and his amazing work right after this break.
We'd like to take a moment to encourage you, as part of our Unity Online radio family of listeners, to support this ministry through a love offering. For your convenience, you can make one-time or recurring monthly donations. Go to www.unity.fm and click on Donate Now. Thank you for your support.
Have you asked your soul what it wants? Or are you so busy meeting the needs of everyone else? Family, friends, children, bosses, that you haven't checked in with the part of you that matters most? Janet Connor asked this question and received an answer. Your soul wants 5 things. That's it. 5 things. Your soul wants to connect with Source, commit to values, serve a purpose, express itself creatively, and last, it longs to create a beautiful, abundant life. Janet Connor teaches 5 wisdom habits that meet those needs. You can take each course separately or register for the complete Your Soul Wants 5 Things series and receive $1,000 in bonuses for free. Visit janetconnor.com and explore all 5 courses in her signature series, Your Soul Wants 5 Things. Your soul will thank you.
You know the saying, a good deed is its own reward? Well, moving toward a plant-based diet and vegan lifestyle is one kind and compassionate act that isn't just its own reward. It will also reward you with vibrant health, boundless energy, and easy way to keep your weight where you want it. And according to yogis and Unity's co-founder Charles Fillmore, even give a boost to your spiritual life. On Main Street Vegan, the radio program named for the popular book, Victoria Moran will make your move in a vegan direction easy, fun, affordable, and delicious. With enticing topics and entertaining guests every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
You've been listening to Design Your Life with the Coach's Coach, Kevin Ross. We want to hear your story. How can Kevin help you design your life? Email us your coaching questions for Kevin at designyourlife@unityonlineradio.org. Like Kevin Kitrell Ross's official fan page. Get your daily design from Kevin.
Welcome back to Design Your Life. I'm Kevin Ross, here today with my friends and colleagues to celebrate the legacy of late former South African President Nelson Mandela. I'm pleased to introduce a South African native, Dr. Tao Braun. Dr. Braun is a clinical psychologist with a degree in education specializing in violence prevention. I'm also joined in the studio by Reverend Dr. James Trapp. Reverend Trapp is the former president and CEO of Unity Worldwide Ministries. He currently serves as senior minister of worship at the Spiritual Life Center and Interfaith Unity Ministry in Sacramento. Also joining us is Reverend Eric Donaldson, the founder of the Healing Workshop Weekends and senior minister of Unity Christian Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Welcome to the show, friends.
Welcome.
So glad that you...
Thank you.
Tao is my African American brother. Now, Tao and I go back to our Miami days. He is a native South African, and we used to joke about it. Tao was a co-founder of an organization called Shin Wellness, where he gave me one of my early opportunities to establish my coaching practice there, which I remain grateful for. But he's truly from the continent, white South African, and we used to joke about the fact that we were both African Americans. Tell us, though, Dr. Tao, how has being a South African, how has your experiences with the man you call Madiba impacted your life today?
Well, Rip Kev, like most of your guests on the show, we have such wonderful things to say about Mandela. Unlike some of your guests, I actually never had the privilege of meeting him. And it's an interesting thing, but in not having the privilege of meeting him, I was always inspired to do great work with the hope of one day meeting him. And I never wanted to meet him in a way that I would meet a celebrity or walk past somebody or see somebody in front of paparazzi. I wanted to meet him because my work brought me to him. And so even as a symbol, even as an icon, he found a way of inspiring people like myself to work really, really hard. And Mandela for me was going to be the great reward, the opportunity of meeting him. But as I've kind of grown older and hopefully a little wiser, I've realized that it wasn't about meeting him. It was about matching and meeting and trying to being inspired
by the kind of work that he did. It's an interesting thing about Madiba, but we have so many names that people know Mandela by. You know, he's Taka, he's the father of the nation. He's Mandela. He's Madiba. My favorite of his names was probably the thing that impacted me the most about him, is that in finding out about him along the way, the thing that inspired me the most was his birth name, and to know that his name was Rolihlahla. And Rolihlahla means two things, and it means a troublemaker. And of course, Rev Kev, you know me, I'm always a troublemaker in the sense that I've got a mouth on me in speaking up for things and making sure that things are done in the best ethical way possible. But Rolihlahla is not just about being a troublemaker. It also means a branch that grows the other way. And when I found that out, Mandela and his work suddenly became so meaningful for me, because, as you know, you can't be a visionary if you're not prepared sometimes to grow the other way from all the other branches.
So let me ask you quickly, and I need you to be succinct with this. Growing up in South Africa, did you experience any of the transformation of the country moving from, apartheid into a liberated South Africa? Can you give just a little bit of a snapshot of your own experience there?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things that I would say that potentially at these times, or once the dust is settled and history has been told, I'm not sure that many people reflect on that time period where, as white South Africans, with the change that was going on, and we were waiting in the aisles, so to speak, for Mandela to come out, and it was a terrifying time. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And this person that we all knew about, this Mandela, this person of power, this person that had created the military wing of his organization, he was going to be released. And nobody knew what was going to happen to the country. And in a very similar way, it's almost like there's that feeling again where the peacemaker of Mandela has already been felt in his memorial service, and all of the leaders from around the world carrying on his work. Mandela had the opportunity of coming out of prison during that transformation and hitting the button. He could have hit the genocide button, and people always speak about how he came out with peace. But as a true statesman and as a true warrior and as a fighter, he knew that he didn't have to wield that power, that his true power was going to come from transformation, was going to come from peace. And that's the button that he decided to push. So as somebody that was there during that time, I can tell you we were holding our breaths, not knowing. I mean, there was a lot of fear, and Mandela alleviated that fear immediately.
Thank you, Taub, for your insightful look at the life of Madiba. We appreciate your contribution to this program. Dr. James Trapp is sitting here with us. He is the spiritual leader of the Center for the Spiritual Life Center. We got so many centers. The Spiritual Life Center here in Sacramento, and the former president of Unity Worldwide Ministries. Welcome, Dr. Trapp.
So it's just a pleasure to be here with so many wonderful people discussing Nelson Mandela.
Forgiveness is a major theme that is spoken of as it pertains to President Mandela's legacy.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on his role in literally ushering a conversation of forgiveness rather than retaliation?
Well, I think it was huge, symbolically, and I knew Nelson Mandela when I was a young college student, knew about him more as a symbol when I was in the 70s in college, and, we took over the administration building in protest of the investment that the university had in South Africa, in support of Mandela and getting rid of apartheid. But I think at that point, I only knew him as a symbol, and I didn't really understand him as a man. And it really started coming to me the night that he was released from prison. He was being...
Where were you? Do you remember where you were?
Yes. I was in Miami, Florida at the time. That was, I think, 1990, I believe, was when he was released that year. So I was in Miami, Florida at that time, and he was being interviewed on Nightline by Ted Koppel. And one of the things that he'd asked Nelson Mandela was, I noticed you've been in prison for 27 years. Yet as I speak to you, I don't see any evidence of anger or hatred or vitriol for those who held you unjustly in prison for those 27 years. And his response stuck with me ever since that time. He says, I do regret that I didn't have a chance to spend time with my wife during those years or to be with my children. But while I was in prison, there were a handful of guards that did some good things for me on my behalf. They may have just smuggled in newspapers for him. They may have given some extra rations. They treated him kindly. And he said that because of that, I gave my attention to what they did for me. And as a result of me giving my attention to that, I have no anger. I have no bitterness. So he truly embodied what it meant to have forgiveness, to look beyond our foibles and try to see the truth of a person, the character of a person, of what he represented. And then many years later, actually a couple of years later, 3 or 4 years later, he visited Miami. And there was a faction of our community, the Cuban American community, that was not very happy about that because
the Cuban American community?
Yes, because he had given some appreciation to Fidel Castro because he had supported him while he was in prison. And so there was a lot of factions that went on, and it ended up leading to a boycott by the African American community for a number of years. That led to, greater job opportunities and economic opportunities over that time. But I think his influence was really beyond that experience, because as I look upon that time now, there are Cuban Americans who are very supportive of who Nelson Mandela is and what he represented. So they had a turnaround because of the essence of who he was.
So that's where I was going. Yeah. So his legacy of forgiveness.
Yes.
Just elaborate a sentence or two on what that.
For me, it just indicated that if he can be in 27 years in prison and forgive his captors and really have coexistence and leadership with those who held him in prison, then there's no reason that I can't forgive anyone who's done anything that I think they have done to me personally. And we can bring this same energy, the same attitude, the same way of being to our communities when we think there's a separation between us and other people or cultures or races, because he wants to get to the essence of people as opposed to what we see from the surface. And so I think he brings that energy and that possibility. If he can do it in his circumstances, we can do it in any situation that we face.
One of President Mandela's most powerful quotes is, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Everyone can rise above their circumstances and achieve success if they are dedicated to doing so and passionate about what they do."
And I would say that he represents really the embodiment of what it means to express spiritual principle. He didn't just talk about it, he lived it.
Absolutely.
And that's what's the most important thing is, because our real theology is what we do in the world. And that's what he did.
Thank you, James. You're listening to Dr. James Trapp. He is the senior minister of the Spiritual Life Center here in Sacramento, California. Joining us now is the Reverend Eric Ovid Donaldson from Memphis, Tennessee. He is the senior minister of Unity Christian Church in Memphis, and a longtime colleague and buddy of mine that I'm glad we were able to wrangle into this program. Welcome, Reverend Donaldson.
Thank you for having me join these people who are sharing their thoughts and aspirations around Nelson Mandela.
What was your reaction when you heard the news that President Mandela was no more? What was your reaction? Where were you? What happened?
Well, as you know, there were rumors of his near demise back in the summer. And so the world had an opportunity to understand what his physical health challenges were for months before he finally succumbed to them and made his transition. And so we all were kind of prepared, although you can't be quite prepared with this. When someone of this magnitude comes your way during the time of your life, I think it's everyone's opportunity to look deep within themselves and make the connections. Unlike many of your friends, I never got the opportunity to meet him firsthand, but I do have an opportunity to read about his life and to capture him beyond the icon that he is, to make him personal to me.
So let me challenge you a little bit then. How do we take, and this is the big piece for me and his transition. What devastated me about the transition in that moment, something shook me to the sense that a type of leadership in our world, and someone who really symbolized that, very rare, has moved off the scene. Now, not necessarily permanently, but the thought is, who caught hold of that spirit among us, and even examining myself. So how do we take that spirit, Reverend Eric, to the streets? How do we mobilize Mandela in the world today in practical ways where we're seeing not only violence, against societies, but against each other? You say?
I believe we have an opportunity to be the next Nelson Mandela. We have an opportunity to see a pattern forming. Before there was a Nelson Mandela, there was a Martin Luther King. Before there was a Martin Luther King, there was a Mahatma Gandhi. And the theme of nonviolence, the theme of forgiveness, resonates through these three transcendent characters. And so we can take a look at that and look at their lives and how they come into that. Nelson Mandela said that he was not a perfect person, that he had did things that he regretted, and yet and still he comes out of prison 27 years later and becomes a shining star of forgiveness. I think we all can take a look at that and take a look at the context in which he became such. Take a look, study the Preservation of Separate Amenities Act. Study the Population Registration Act. Study how divestiture played a tremendous role in what took place that created who he became. And then look at where we can get involved in our own lives.
You're listening to the eloquent Reverend Eric Donaldson, who is the senior minister of Unity Christian Church, giving us his thoughts and reflections on the life of the late former Nelson Mandela. As we close, I'll bring you some words by the president. He says, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." We're talking today about the inspiring life of Nelson Mandela, a man whose legacy will outlive us all. Stay tuned as we discuss the impact Nelson Mandela had on the world by showing us the immense power that can be found in forgiveness. You're listening to Design Your Life. I'm Kevin Ross. We'll be right back.
Do you experience the peace and joy promised by A Course in Miracles? Or are you still struggling to truly live your beliefs from moment to moment? Let Reverend Jennifer Hadley help you focus on your intent to be the love, be the peace, through practical application by walking your talk. Experience the healing live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central on A Course in Miracles, Living the Love, Walking the Talk, only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
We now return to Design Your Life with the Coach's Coach, Kevin Ross.
Welcome back. Today we're remembering and celebrating the incredible life and influence of Nelson Mandela, men whose life and legacy gives us hope for a future of unity and grace. President Mandela was a man of character rarely seen in the world, a leader who went from prisoner to president, united a country, and inspired the world. With me in conversation today is Bishop Carlton Pearson and Reverend Georgia Prescott. Bishop Pearson is the founding director of New Dimensions in Chicago, where he is building a multicultural and radically inclusive spiritual community. I'm also joined in the studio with a dynamic and gifted teacher, Reverend Georgia Prescott. She is the founding senior minister of the Center for Spiritual Awareness in West Sacramento. Welcome, you wonderful luminaries, to our program. Thanks so much for being here. Let's begin with...
What a privilege.
Let's begin with a topic that we haven't explored a little bit of. Let's talk about President Mandela's ability to address inclusivity, where he was capable of seeing, you will recall at a time, he had an option of, he had the power to, he was trying to unite the country. Do you recall? And he used soccer as a force for bringing the country together because he knew that there was a way. And he had an opportunity to either go with the old colors, remember the colors of the, and he chose not to revert to those colors, but to keep a unifying presence. What's important about his willingness to be radically inclusive in order to save the nation? We'll start with you, Bishop Pearson, and then we'll talk with Reverend Georgia.
Well, I think Mandela was, and that's affectionately a term of respect for him. I think that Nelson Mandela was not just didn't make a choice alone. He really responded to a deep inner calling. And nearly every one of his interviews, he made reference to the purging or the purgation of the soul when he was in prison, and how they never broke his spirit, but they broke down walls that he had built up of anger and unforgiveness and resentments and bitterness, some of it very understandable. So by the time he came through that purgation or that purging of the self and soul, he was reduced to forgiveness. And also, he recognized that he did not want to repeat the deadly negative energy that was perpetrated toward him and his people. And he automatically became inclusive. He automatically wanted to free a democratic nation. That was part of his calling and his divine coding after he went through an almost born-again awakening. I don't mean that in the Christian sense of the term, but a born-again awakening experience on Robben Island. That's all I can see, and I hear it in his comments about it. He became intuitively inclusive, radically inclusive, because that's what he wanted to see before he actually went into prison.
Reverend Georgia, do you think it was a form of colorblindness?
No, I don't. I think we have to be careful when we talk about his powerful forgiveness movement, which was enormous. We have to remember that this is a man who, sometimes we say you are pushed by circumstances or pulled by a vision. And I think that he saw color. I absolutely do. But I think that he saw the importance of letting everybody be their authentic self and be the best they could be at any given time. So I think that vision that he was pulled is powerful. I also think his commitment to oneness was, has just inspired so many people.
Any of you have any personal reflections on how his work intersects with the work that you do today? We'll start with Bishop Pearson and Reverend George.
Well, I made several trips to South Africa while apartheid was still in position. My first trip was in 1978. And I remember it took me 5 years to get in the country because I was the first African American to bring in an racially integrated team as the leader. And so I had to go through all kinds of red tape to get in there. But and I saw the impoverishment of the soul. I saw the downtrodden spirit. I saw the brokenness. And I spoke to 10,000 people a night when I was going over there in those days. In fact, 3 months before he was released from prison, I was there, and I had all the white people stand up in this. It was a Christian gathering, 10,000 or so a night. I had all the white people apologize for the years and years of discrimination and racial hatred and apartheid or apartness and racial discrimination. And the leader of the meeting was an Afrikaans, and I didn't ask permission to do this, so he was real awkward and very uncomfortable. But so was the crowd. And they apologized. Then I had the blacks stand and forgive, and we committed to a peaceful, bloodless transition. And that we did it in front of that live audience, plus people were watching, hearing it on live radios. It was very powerful. Well, I was there last week, the week before Nelson made his transition, and I was picked up by a black man who was a boy listening to me preach in those days, who's driving a brand new Jaguar, paid for, and he was taking me to his mansion. And he stopped 3 times as we were going across the city and gave money to white people who were begging. And I said to him, "Young man, you have no idea." In fact, one of the men who stopped us, he said, "I was raised as an orphan and I live in a homeless shelter, and I'm selling these cookies to support the shelter. Would you like to buy some and support?" And Muzi, who was my friend, Muzi Cindy, he refused the cookies but gave him the money anyway. I had tears in my eyes that I had seen, and in that same street I saw poor South African blacks coming out of the little areas. What do you call them? Where the poor people live. I forgot the name. It just slipped my mind.
The shanty towns. And they were walking with such hope and such happy anticipation. They were still poor, many of them, millions of them still are, but they knew there was hope. They walked with such grace and such gladness, and everybody seemed to have a smile on their face. And I thought, this is a changed country because of that man. I heard him speak at the Waldorf Astoria, right, before he was president, but the atmosphere in South Africa had already changed profoundly. I have to quickly just squeeze in a millisecond story. In South Africa, that's part of the other piece, to the witness of the impact it had on the people. So while in Cape Town, I'm having lunch with one of the South African freedom fighters his name was Bushi Reko, and I'll never forget his name. Beautiful, handsome young man, bright, alive, radiant with light. We were all there, his colleagues from around the world, having lunch. And it was time to pay the bill. And we had listened to his story of being tortured, being cow prodded, and this was an everyday struggle for him. And the light that was coming from this young man was just unbelievable. And so he went to, they brought the bill for the lunch to pay, for us to pay our lunch. It was a group of about 20 of us. And Bushy went to reach for his wallet, and everybody unanimously said, no, you've paid enough already. It was just so what happened there was truly
spiritual,
amazing. Yeah, it was a spiritual thing. Yeah. So, Reverend Georgia, your reflections.
Well, I want to go back to a question you had posed before, and that is, what can we do, and are there new leaders coming up with his legacy fully in mind? And I'm remembering that handshake that our own President Barack Obama extended to Raul Castro during that was a beautiful thing, and I could just feel Mandela smiling down. And yet, we need to keep that conversation going, because we see on the radio now and the right so many unkind comments about that. I want to tell you, I actually saw him. And many of your guests have seen him. I saw him. I was back 6,000 people behind, seeing him in Oakland at the Coliseum.
Oh, you were in Oakland?
When I was a young girl.
Wow.
And so the impact it meant on me is this. I was involved in the radical gay liberation movement at the time, and we were relatively angry folks. And I could feel his peace. I could feel his forgiveness. It was an energy. It's an essence that people who truly get it. And as I reflected on it, I realized, he was in jail for 27 years, and he often spoke about sometimes he wished he could go back there so that he could have more time for reflection. And it said to me, you need to step back from all of the hullabaloo, which I loved and I participated in, but I needed to step back and create my own silent time, as he was afforded in jail.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So while we have this couple minutes left, let's reflect on that. What's the value of silence and solitude for personal transformation, and social transformation? We'll start with Bishop, and then we'll come back to you, Reverend.
Well, brokenness and isolation and silence can be so noisy, and beyond the noise and the nausea is a real sound. And in those moments of meditation and quietness, and even rejection and isolation or alienation from what it would normally be common to us, we hear our souls at a level, and we tune into a frequency preceded by pain and rejection that connects us with an element of ourselves that we would never have experienced. And in that silence, you hear the intonations of divinity, and they reverberate through your very soul. And both on a cellular and cellular level, you change. When Nelson Mandela came out of that prison, he had changed on every level of his humanness, and yet maintained his humility. And we saw it all and experienced it in him.
Thank you. Yeah, he was no longer a prisoner to anger.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
No.
And he was no longer engaged in the day-to-day reactivity that we need to be sometimes when we are warriors for justice. And when you step back, you can actually see the vision of what it is you're looking for, as opposed to reacting to what just happened.
Education was important to President Mandela. He became an attorney himself, and he pushed that as something of importance to South Africa for young people. What is the role that our institutions, what roles can our institutions play in shaping the kind of consciousness that produces the Nelson Mandelas of the world? We'll start Reverend Georgia, and then we'll end with Bishop Pearson.
Well, I think we have to start with much younger than law school. I think we have to start when children are your age, your kids' age, Kevin, when they're in the first and second grade and even kindergarten, and begin to, forgiveness is a skill. And as he taught that skill, we can begin to teach that skill as well.
Bishop Pearson, with just seconds left.
Well, education is another word for preparation, but reparation. You don't just prepare. He repaired while he was in prison, and he prepared before he got in there. And that was the education. If we could get our young people today to prepare by repairing, changing their thinking about themselves, even that imposed upon them by a vicious, insensitive culture sometime. I had to go through, because I'm a child of the civil rights, as all baby boomers are. I'm 60 years old, so I remember the pain. But I had to go through some personal reparations. I had to repair myself in my preparation, which, of course, added to the education and the ultimate reconciliation.
That's right.
Thanks so much for joining us on Design Your Life. I send a special thank you to all my guests today for their heartfelt reflections on the important role President Mandela played in each of our lives and shaping our world. Reverend Dr. Bernard Beckwith, Ona Brown, Dr. Tal Braun, Reverend Dr. James Trapp, Reverend Eric Donaldson, Bishop Carlton Pearson, and Reverend Georgia Prescott. We wish you the best, and may the light and inspiration of President Mandela be forever in our hearts. Meanwhile, listeners and friends, go forth and be a light right where you are.
Thank you for tuning in to Design Your Life with Kevin Ross. Join us every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central for another life-changing episode. This program is brought to you in part by Unity of Sacramento, live streaming every Sunday online at unityofsacramento.com.
Spirit of Recovery is the place where spirituality and recovery meet, where we support your spiritual growth. Reverend Anna Schaus, Ph.D., interviews down-to-earth guests who share with you how they keep going and growing in recovery. Spirit of Recovery is the place to get practical tips and join in lively discussions on topics that matter to recovering people. This program welcomes everyone who wants to know more about recovery. Join Anna and her guests live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Time on Spirit of Recovery, where we talk about what keeps you growing. Only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Inspiration only takes a moment. If you are able to safely turn your attention away from the demands of your activities, quiet your mind and affirm, "There is a divine plan at work in my life. I now relax, let go, and let it unfold." Listen attentively, inwardly, without projecting any thoughts about what you think should happen or be experienced. Become as a child, trusting and receptive to the guidance of Spirit within.
This meditative moment, adapted from Mary Kupferle's God Will See You Through, is brought to you by Unity.
If I were brave, I'd walk the razor's edge, where fools and dreamers dare to tread, and never lose faith.
How is life working for you? Would it be okay with you if life got easier, simpler, yet more meaningful and vibrant? Join certified life coach Carla McClellan Tuesday afternoons for Vibrant Living. Each week, Coach Carla and her guests will share strategies and solutions designed to make your life more vibrant. Is there something in your life you'd like help with? A dream you'd like to achieve? A relationship you'd like to improve? Call into the show toll-free for Coaching with Carla. That's Vibrant Living, Life Coaching with Carla. Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Central on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
What if we're all meant to do what we secretly dream?
Does music open your heart and bring you peace and joy? Experience the sacredness of sound with Ramdesh Kaur as we travel the world of mantra, Kundalini Yoga, and devotional music. Join us for a journey into spirit, Thursdays at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern on Spirit Voyage Radio with Ramdesh. Only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.